Welcome to Vulnerability, Introspection and Growth, the podcast where we explore the beautiful, messy and transformative magic that happens when we dare to go within. I'm your host, Robin Harris, and in each episode we'll dive into real, honest stories from people who've faced their fears, embraced their vulnerabilities, and discovered unexpected growth in their personal lives, careers, or businesses. This is a space for deep listening, open hearts, and soul-nourishing conversations. Because when we meet ourselves in our rawest moments, that's often where our greatest wisdom starts. Let's begin. Hello and welcome to this episode of Vulnerability, Introspection and Growth. And today I'm absolutely delighted to have with me a friend who I've known for some time now, Diana Robinson. And just to give Diana a very quick introduction, she combines two careers that she loves deeply. The first, which she's been practicing on and off for 50 years, is her varied life with horses. And this began when Diana was a toddler and continues today in her late 60s. The second is as a published author. And Diana Robinson is her name as an author, but her married name is actually McElwain. And she was born and raised on a farm in what was then Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. And her passions, as you might have guessed, are horses, nature, and writing. And as she says simply, life lights me up. So welcome, Diana. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be chatting to you.
And I start all of these podcasts with three quick questions that I ask my guests. The first of those is, what makes your story relatable for others?
Well, I think it's an emotive story and many would relate to it. It's inspirational and motivational.
Wonderful. And that's where we do connect, isn't it? Those emotions that we share. And who do you feel will gain the most from listening to this conversation?
Anybody that's faced trauma and is feeling insecure about facing the world, because
Wonderful,
there's
thank you.
so much support out there now.
There is indeed, yes. So what do you hope people will take away from this conversation?
I'm hoping that they will be inspired by my life, my strength, and it'll uplift them to understand they don't need to be vulnerable anymore.
That's wonderful, thank you. And just to go into your story a little bit and your own experience, and as you mentioned, traumatic and all that you were touching on there. But your mother died with liver cancer when you were only 6, and then in the same year, your father was badly injured in a polo accident. Would you share with us a little bit of what this was like for you at such a young age, and what helped you to navigate that deeply challenging time?
Going back, I think it was well, as a child, you sort of don't really understand what's happening at 6 years old. I mean, there's a loss. You sense the emotions from obviously your grandparents and my father and my siblings, but you're kind of numbed, I think. You don't know how to reveal what you're feeling, but I think it had an impact as time filtered on, um, because I then I remember sort of stepping back from the world, as it were, and I used to try and gauge how to take the next step forward as a child, excuse me. And so the next step was straight into my father's polo ponies stable. And you don't have a clue what the energetic healing is all about then. You just take it on board, and it just sort of fills you because there you feel complete freedom, absolute comfort. There's no judgment. There's no, it doesn't matter if you talk to yourself or your horses. Yeah, and it was just very, very comforting. So I found a lot of inspiration from being with them and being out in nature.
Completely get that. And for anybody who's read my book, you'll know that animals were a large part of what helped me on my journey. And exactly what you said, I love that you said it, that there's that non-judgmental, just come as you are. You don't have to be anything in particular, just yourself.
Yeah,
And they just accept that honesty, whether you're in a good place, in a really difficult, painful place. They're just there, aren't they? And they just allow you the space and that freedom to explore and express how you feel without
exactly.
worrying about what somebody's going to say back to you, what they're going to reflect back to you. You can just have that ability to work through, because emotions are energy in motion. It's when we hold
Exactly.
them that it can
Mm.
become a real problem in our lives. But when we can have that space and just be free to
Mm.
express them, or
Yeah,
to work through them, because sometimes, and I'm sure you would have experienced this yourself around the animals, you're just being. You're not
yeah,
necessarily doing anything. You're not expressing through some form, like, in therapy, you have to talk things out or write things, or we're not necessarily doing that around animals. And yet, there is something that we just have that ability to assimilate the emotions, the challenges that we faced
yeah.
in a beautiful way, very graceful way, and particularly around horses. And they've done a lot of studies now, haven't they, in America with heart math and so on, about that healing energy that you touched on.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a very powerful energy. And I think the best way to describe that energy is to just not try and interpret what they're telling us. Don't do it there in the moment. Just be yourself. Be absolutely open and authentic because horses can pick it up straight away when you're not. Um, And they just allow that healing. It's just the most incredible um, and necessary vibration, isn't it? And it doesn't matter how old you are, that's the beauty of it. And in my life, I've been involved with some very seriously handicapped and disabled persons, from tiny tots in nappies to elderly folk, and using the horses for therapy. And they've just taught me even more. And the beauty of innocence as a child is so taken on board by horses, but not just horses. Dogs and cats are quite different because they're very domesticated, and they're with us all the time, and they give us a different energy. Um, but if being out with wild animals, as I have in my life, observed quietly wild horses in two different environments, and then having the pleasure of being able to sit not far from a wild herd of zebra and know how amazing that was. It just fills you with such energy and such motivation that we are so far behind as humans. We've lost the ability to feel the earth beneath our feet and be grounded because we wear shoes.
Actually, I've been on a personal kind of challenge not to wear shoes, and I've written a little bit and shared a little bit about that. And it has made such a difference in my life. I'm standing here barefoot at the moment, even though the weather is getting a lot chip. Well, I say a lot chillier. It's chilly for the UK. I'm sure some people who maybe are listening from other parts of the globe are thinking, your UK temperatures, they're not that cold. But definitely it does make a difference to go barefoot. Coming back to what you were saying about that childlike energy,
Mm,
and I think this is a challenge that as adults we really face. Certainly here in the UK, a lot of our educational system and systems in the workplace and so on, they're very focused on the head and the
yes.
head brain and IQ, intelligence quotient, rather than our EQ, our emotional quotient. And you talked right back at the very beginning in terms of what is relatable about the story you're sharing today. It is that emotional
Mm,
connection,
mm,
because emotionally we might use different words to describe our emotions, but we're all human. We all feel them. And I think that is something that really connects us. And when we get rid of all of the on top stuff and just allow ourselves to be and to feel those emotions, then that can connect us not only with other people, but with the animals, because we're just another animal, aren't we? And to be able to just, I remember one particular example. I was on an animal communication course, and the tutor gave me a picture of her horse, and just looking into his eyes and just feeling that connection, even though it's with a different species, and knowing as I grew up, like you said yourself, connecting with those animals. For me, it was mostly dogs, a few horses, but again, just looking into their eyes, and you just know there's another soul. And that word anima that went on to be animal is soul, spirit.
mm, mm.
We share that, I believe. That they're, to me,
Exactly.
they're non-human persons. They just might have four legs or no legs or swim. But
Yes.
we're all here as part of the life of the planet, and we all have an energy. And I think for us as adults, when we can get back to the childlike energy and that more open heart, more connection with the earth, more connection with our heart brain and our gut brain, then that really. And there are exercises we can do in the heart math, and even just opening our chest up, because
Yeah.
so often we can be quite
Yeah.
protective,
Yeah.
and that can come from trauma as well. But as we begin to open out and to welcome in, I think that is so beautiful. You have described a time that I'm sure was very traumatic for you as a 6 year old, even if you weren't able to put that into words or to rationalize it.
Mm,
But still, you will have been picking up on those energies from your father, from your grandparents, and not understanding logically, but still feeling deeply all that was
mm.
going on in
Yeah.
and around you.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us a little bit about how that impacted on you? I know that this is looking back now with hindsight. Maybe you wouldn't have had the particular words as a 6 year old, but how it
Yeah.
impacted on you and how you then responded.
I cut off. I absolutely cut off. Um, and then the interesting thing, although it was a medical issue, I think it was born from an emotional trauma, was I went deaf. So over time, it took a while, but over the first year at school, I I didn't, I had a select two friends and that was it. Um, and then slowly my hearing became gradually worse and worse and worse. And then we were having our end of term little tests. I mean, there weren't exams in those days or at that age, but we had this little test and for the end of term report. So I shifted my little desk because it was boarding school um, next to my best friend and had warned her that I would probably copy all her answers because I hadn't heard half of the term's work. But I never expressed it. I didn't know how to. I wasn't confident enough. I thought I'd get into trouble. All those things that suppress us when we're children. Um, so I started copying, and of course, not being able to hear, I didn't know the teacher was watching and standing right beside me. So she took me to the headmaster. And of course, I was absolutely terrified. But she was so sympathetic and so wonderful. She sat me down in front of the headmaster and told him what had happened. And she said, I don't think this child can hear anything or not much. I think you should phone her father and get her to see a ear, nose, and throat specialist, which is exactly what happened. So that was in the March of the first year of my sort of formal school. And from March through to December that year, not long before my birthday, I was in hospital and I had 17 operations on one ear and 15 on another. And I had to learn to walk again. My balance was affected. I knew exactly what it was like to live in a world of silence. It was quite incredible. But I think I'd taken myself in there because I didn't want to hear, you know. I didn't want to hear what had happened. I didn't want to see my father as he was, you know. I didn't want to listen to anybody, and I didn't. My poor grandparents pulled their hair out, you know, and I was very distant. But I also experienced the most horrific pain. You know what earache's like? It's just the worst. And I'd wake screaming at night. We were living with my grandparents then, with the pain. So I enjoyed a lot of pain as well. And so the world wasn't a happy place, you know. It really wasn't. It was painful, both physically and emotionally. But I had great nursing in the hospital. Um, Being 70 miles away from home and grandparents, and you understand loneliness on a level that most children don't experience, you know. So, but when I came home and I could hear everything crystal clear, life started to change, you know, and I had the support of my father and the love of the horses, and yeah, I'd get out onto them as often as I could, and we were allowed to ride wherever we wanted to. Um, and I confess that most of the time was without a helmet or anything else. We just went, and we had thousands of acres on which to ride, really wild bushveld. And I bless my father as long as I've lived, and will live, that he had the courage and the strength, inner strength, to just let us be children,
And that
you know.
must have been huge after he'd had an accident. I presume that was on horseback?
Absolutely.
But that's really interesting what you said there about not being able to hear, and there was kind of an element, not of choice as such, but as that protection of yourself as a child. I don't want to hear it. It's potentially too painful for me to hear what I might hear, and that
Yeah.
feels scary. And in my work with meta consciousness, that's exactly what we do. We look at where a symptom might have come from. And you also alluded to the fact that it was a medical symptom. However, there was something more going on. There was an emotional,
Definitely.
a trauma. The result was an emotional trauma response, and it
Mm.
was that self protection. And I often encourage people to look at the symptoms they're experiencing, whatever those might be, whether they're physical or they're behavioral or cognitive or whatever,
Yeah.
and to celebrate the fact that your body is doing what it needs to do, and it's always the aim is always to keep you safe.
Yeah.
So to celebrate the fact that your body has these amazing resources within it that are always striving to keep us safe, but unfortunately they might have got stuck at some point. Like yours got stuck in I can't hear. I it doesn't feel safe for me to hear. I don't
Yeah.
know what I might hear.
Yeah.
And when we recognize that, we can then take steps as your steps were all those operations. I can't believe how many operations you had to go through at such a young age. But that there are steps we can take, and they're not necessarily medical ones. There are things that we can do that support the body back to healing because it knows how to be healthy and well. It's about creating that right environment and putting that safety in place. So
Absolutely.
you've talked a little bit about that trauma and how it impacted on you and how you responded. Again, if I can just ask, what supported you and helped you as you went through that time? You mentioned the horses, getting out on the horses, being out in nature. How did that continue then to play out? Was there anything else that supported you, or what was it about that, do you think, now looking back, that helped you to make that shift into going on to being a writer and working with horses and sharing all that you now do?
Yeah, it's not an answer that one can sum up in a short time, but um I think it ha also had a reverse effect, if you like, because um some of the family members always sort of said to me, "You're way too stupid," because I was deaf. "You're way too stupid to amount to anything." Do you know that it took until I had gone through menopause to shake that? You know, so what I learned, the comparison of healing with humans and healing with animals, was one doesn't judge you. Doesn't matter what you've gone through. It doesn't matter what you look like, and it doesn't matter what you wear. You don't have to be dressed. And then with humans, the criticism, the judgment, the finger pointing, the devastation that words are more harmful than being beaten. You know, I just words are so powerful and they play such an emotional role in your life and your development as a teenager.
Unfortunately, they stick, don't they? If
Absolutely.
you get beaten or you fall off your horse and you hurt yourself, your body physically can recover to a large extent.
Yeah.
But those words, unfortunately, they really do stick. And it's wonderful with the whole resilience that
Mm.
you actually experienced. You've bounced back from such a lot. And to also, you were talking about being inspirational and motivational at the beginning. You mentioned that it did take you a while.
Yeah.
So, not for any listeners, this is also a sign that it's good to keep going, not to give up, because we might have thought if I'm still feeling this way and I'm in my 40s, in my 50s, then that's how it's going to be for the rest of my life. But you have proven that that's not the case. You shook this off when you were a woman in that kind of age.
Yeah. I think I shook it off to a degree, quite early on, being quite sort of outspoken and gregarious and easy to communicate with others once I got the hearing back. And I think it was all the horse riding that I did and that connection with horses and some very deep connective situations with horses in difficult situations for the horse themselves that I learned about myself in the quiet of a stable or the ears back of an angry mare. And I approached her and said to her, I understand where you're coming from. I'm also a mare. I'm also of the female gender. Let's talk, you know. And I don't think I always showed a bit of being timid with people, but I was never timid as such with horses. I could just go in there, be myself, and that transparency and authenticity connects you on a very deep level. And that I think gave me self-confidence out there. But I always sort of thought that I gave the world the sort of opinion of myself as being needy, and perhaps I was without really realizing it, you know. So you go in to the world giving that impression that you're needy. Um, it does have a great impact on relationships, especially male-female relationships, um, because I've had three partners in my life, and they've not always been the greatest. and then I found my soulmate, you know. So, yes, being vulnerable can also have its drawbacks until you're emotionally mature enough to handle being vulnerable, because it's a very difficult thing to be vulnerable.
And I think the point of this podcast is that it's embracing that vulnerability. It's getting curious about that vulnerability
Mm.
and compassionate towards ourselves, and knowing that vulnerability actually can allow us to connect with others if we can create a space where it's safe to be vulnerable. That's not always the case. And when we're not consciously aware of our vulnerability, you mentioned that you felt the world saw you as needy. It's not necessarily how you viewed yourself, but
Yeah.
it might have been how you felt you were perceived by others. That's maybe a more risky kind of vulnerability, because
Mm.
that's maybe a vulnerability in the eyes of somebody else, which
Yeah.
you might be concerned they're going to use, manipulate. So I think there are different aspects to vulnerability. But I think when we can acknowledge our vulnerability, get curious about it, be compassionate with ourselves, it can be a strength.
Yes.
Because then it's like that thing of, if you don't own your emotions will own you. The
Yes. Oh,
converse
yes.
of that
That's
is,
so
when you
true.
own your emotions, oh boy, that's
Yeah.
powerful. So I
Yeah.
think that's the kind of take that this podcast is seeking to share.
Mm.
We are getting short on time now. The time has gone so quickly, and I would like to offer you the opportunity, invite you to share a little bit about. I know you've got one of your books there.
Yes.
You write fiction, but you also wrote the most beautiful book about your experience with horses and all that horses have shared with you. So, just before we close, would you show us the book and tell us briefly about where that has come from and what you seek to share through it?
Okay, so here's the cover. Um, and it's called Connect. It's called an Equisole technique, which I developed over many years, and obviously with all my varied experiences with horses and in various situations. Um, so it's understanding horses and their language to be able to improve and connect working with horses, being consistently kind, incredibly patient, and understanding what they're telling us from a very base level. And the book is in hardcover and it's in paperback as well. And in the new year, I'm writing book two. Um, so this will target on a much more emotive level than sharing my junior school pony club years and all those funny little anecdotes that I filled the book with. And it'll, the first book, Connect, has definitely got a place for people who have never been with horses or who know about horses, but they haven't achieved the goal of understanding their communication. The language of Equus is silent, and to read it properly. So it's got a place for probably teenagers from 16 years old onwards, the first book, and anybody who's an adult that may be entering the world of horses at an older age. And the next book is much more advanced.
Sounds wonderful. When you say you're starting it, are you starting to write it, or have you got a time scale in terms of when it might be available?
I think it'll be available probably mid towards the end of next year because I'm actually writing another book based on a true story of a friend of mine who was an international endurance rider. Um, and her story and my story are so closely related that it's amazing. But, and very inspirational, especially for women who have gone through any form of trauma. Um, this will really inspire them to take themselves seriously, love themselves deeply, and move on with excitement, going back to that child.
I love
Yeah.
that, Diana. It sounds amazing. I can't wait to see that out in print. So, if you would now, just as we draw to a close, let people know where they can find you, both for your horse work and also for your books and being an author.
Okay, well, I do have a website and it's called Diana K Publications. Um, then on social media platforms, I'm on Facebook as Diana Carenza Robinson and as Hallmark Equestrian Services for all my other work, the massage and the equine thermography and stuff like that. So yeah, and Diana K. Robinson publications on Facebook and Instagram. So I'm a bit of a dinosaur when it comes to all of this technology and what have you, but I am available.
Wonderful. And thank you again, Diana. It's been wonderful having this conversation with you today. I will be sharing Diana's connections and all of her links and so on in the notes below this episode. So do feel free to have a click and an explore. And just to say thank you very much for joining us again here today. If you've enjoyed this episode, you'd like to watch some more, then please do feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you again next time. Bye for now. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Vulnerability, Introspection and Growth. I hope it's given you a moment to breathe, reflect, and perhaps even see your own story with a little more compassion. If you found this conversation meaningful, I'd love it if you'd share, subscribe, or leave a review. It helps others find their way here too. Until next time, take gentle care, and remember, the journey inwards is where the real growth begins.